Hi everyone, we're going to continue our study of percents. Hopefully the review of percents from the last lesson helped. As a warm-up, what I'd like you to do is look at the percent and the description and see if you can match each percent with the description. So pause, do some matching, and then come back. Alright, how'd you do? Here, I'm half of a half. Half of a half is 25%. So 5 out of 20 is 25%. I am less than 1/100th. 1/100th is the same thing as 1%. So the only one of these that was less than 1% was this 0.5%. I'm the chance of being a boy or a girl or flipping a coin. Well, it's in theory, theoretically, 50%. I'm less than half, but more than 1/4. Well, less than half, that's 50%. 1/4 is 25%. So the only one that's between there is 30%. I'm equal to 1, 35 out of 35. If I got 35 out of 35 correctly, I would have 100%. So equal to 1. I'm a tenth of a tenth. A tenth of a tenth is 1%. So a tenth of a tenth is 1%, or 1/100. So it would be this one. And the last one, I'm less than a fourth. So a fourth, remember, is 25%, but more than 100th. And 100th is 1 out of 100, or 1%. So the only one that was left, and the only one between 1 and 25, was 10. How'd you do? Alright, for this one, I want you to color the grids to represent the following fractions. So I want you to remember that this flat is 100 squares. So 30 out of 100 would look like, here's 10, 20, 30. And also remember that the per 100 is the same thing as per cent. Because there's 100 cents in a dollar. 100 means like centennial, cent, 100. So this symbol right here. So 30 out of 100 is the same thing, or 30 hundredths is the same thing as 30%. 3 hundredths. So 3 hundredths, instead of 30, there's just 3 of them. And that would be 3%, because the per 100 is the same thing as per cent. And 1/3 of 100. That does not mean that you're coloring a third of the squares. It means 1/3 of a percent. So you're not even coloring a whole square, but 1/3 of one. On your assessment, you will have to do something very similar to this to get a beginning. So this is like a beginning question. Alright, so it says use the definition of the word percent. So remember we talked about percent means per 100 or over 100 to change the percents to fractions and decimals. Okay, so here, percent, we're just going to put everything over 100, like this. And so it's going to look funny because we generally do not leave it in this form, but for today's purposes, It's 1/2 out of 100, not 1/2 of 100, 1/2 out of 100, or 0.5 out of 100. 1%, 1 out of 100. 110% is 110 out of 100, or 110 hundredths, or 0.5 hundredths, or 1/100th. And this would be 100 hundredths, and this would be 37.5 hundredths. Now again, generally we do not leave fractions or decimals in the numerator, but for our purposes, we're just trying to use that definition of per 100. So what would it look like as a decimal? Very confusing for some. That looks like a decimal, but it is in percent form. So we would have to divide it by 100 to get the decimal form. So 37.5 divided by 100, you have to move, anytime you divide by a power of 10, you're making it one place value smaller. So like this. Or if there's 37, if it was 37 hundredths, you write it like you say it, so it would be this part right here. But now it was 37, it's a half more than that. So 37.5 hundredths, or 0.375, which we can say as 375 thousandths. So here we have 100 out of 100. Anything over itself is 1. 110 over 100. Again, we can move the decimal 2 places, or if we had 110 hundredths, it would be like this. So if we just had this 10 hundredths, this would be 10 hundredths, but we have 100 more than that. 1/100th, that's an easy one to see. 1/100th, if this is a hundredths place value, we would have 1. And 0.5, well, if this is 1/100th, a half of 1 would not even be that. So it would be like this. And another way to think of it, every time if you have this, every time you divide by a power of 10, you move the place value 2 places. So either way, you can think about it on how you write it, how you say it, or you can think about it like moving that decimal place. Okay, so for this problem, you're not just given the percent this time. Sometimes you're starting with a fraction, sometimes you're starting with a decimal, and sometimes a percent. And you will have to do this type of problem on your assessment as well. So, how do we want to go about doing this? I think, let's just start with the first one, percent. If it is 350%, that is 350 over 100. And then we can simplify, which we didn't on the other one. So each 35 over 10 is 7 halves. And decimal, 2 goes into 7, so to go from a fraction to a decimal, you divide the numerator by the denominator. So 2 goes into 7 3 times with 1 left over, so 3.5. Or you could have moved your decimal 2 places this way. Decimal to a percent. Now we have to go 2 places this way, 2.5%, or 2.5 hundredths. So remember, we want to have hundredths in the denominator to start with, because we want to match this per 100 up with this percent. So I don't like leaving decimals in, so I am going to move the decimal place over and over on the bottom. So 25 thousandths. All right, for this last one, I think I would like to start with the fraction to a decimal, because for that you divide. Remember, this symbol means divide. So you're going to divide the numerator by the denominator. So 8 goes into 1 0 times. We're out of numbers, so we have to put our decimal in and start adding zeros. 8 goes into 10 one time, and then we subtract, add another 0. 8 goes into 20 two times, add another 0, and it goes into 40 5 times and with no remainder. So our decimal is 0.125. So you can think of that as percent. Here's my hundredths place, so it will be 12.5%, or 12.5 hundredths, so 12.5%. Or we could have just moved our decimal over 2 places. Alright, so we're going to do some practicing. I am hoping that if you are watching previewing this video, you still come to class, because I want you to participate in an activity. It is going to be a I have, who has, and I think you did this with Ms. Kabatsky for something else, but you're going to have a card and you have to put it in all 3 forms, so it will be in one form and you have to put it in the rest, and then you have to listen carefully, because someone will say, I have 22 hundredths, who has 1/5 hundredths, or something like that, and you have to listen for your card. So that's the activity. I want you to remember that 1/100th is the same thing as 1%, so P% is the same thing as P over 100, and usually there are 3 ways to write a number: the percent, the fraction, and the decimal. They're all equivalent to one another. All right, we out.